In this week's Plate of History Beans, I'll continue my look at how Jim Crow laws evolved over a few decades in the South following emancipation and the Civil War. Last week I spoke of the civil rights cases of 1883. In that Supreme Court decision, SCOTUS judges determined two things. First, the decision established that businesses didn't have to serve anyone they didn't want to. In practical terms, this meant that white business owners in the South didn't have to let black folks buy their goods or use their services. Second, the civil rights cases of 1883 established that states, not the federal government under the 14th Amendment, could set up their own laws regarding the use of public facilities. This aspect of the SCOTUS ruling was ultimately more damaging in that it unlocked the door for separate but equal laws. To give a specific example of how this law played out, in 1887, Florida passed a law that required trains provide separate cars for black and white riders. Other states soon followed suit. In today's plate, I'll talk about the court case of Plessy versus Ferguson. I know most of you have heard of this case. You probably recall your high school history teacher talking about it. If you're like me, you filed the information in some dark corner of your brain where it gathered dust and was largely forgotten. For black Americans, though, Plessy versus Ferguson changed their lives dramatically in that it kicked open the door for separate but equal laws and ushered in the era of full-blown Jim Crow oppression. In 1890, Louisiana passed a law exactly like the one I mentioned in Florida a moment ago, forcing trains to provide separate cars for whites and blacks. Homer Plessy took up the cross of testing the constitutionality of that law, and here's how it played out. Plessy, who described himself as 7/8 Caucasian and 1/8 black, took his seat in the white car on June 7th, 1892. Here's a picture of Homer Plessy. To my eye, he looks like a normal white person, but on that day, the train's engineer said Homer Plessy needed to go to the black car. Homer refused and was arrested and jailed. Later at his court hearing, Plessy was convicted and quickly filed a petition against the presiding judge, John H. Ferguson, on the grounds that his ruling violated the Equal Protection Clause in the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. Thus, Plessy versus Ferguson. The case didn't reach the Supreme Court for another 4 years. In that time, Congress nullified a number of Reconstruction-era laws, many of them related to voting. The brief window of time between emancipation, when blacks, thanks to the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution, had a semblance of equality and were allowed to buy goods anywhere they wanted, attend schools with whites, and perhaps most importantly, vote without harassment or specialized laws meant to prevent them from voting, was closing quickly. It must have been a difficult time for blacks in America. In many cases, the same generation of folks that had just been freed had to watch as the rights they thought were theirs were gradually trimmed away by Jim Crow laws. In May of 1896, the Supreme Court, with Michigan Justice Henry Brown delivering the ruling, upheld Jim Crow, stating that blacks had civil rights like voting and jury duty, but not social rights like sitting in a rail car of your choice. Thus, the concept of separate but equal was cemented into the U.S. legal code, and the trickle of state legislations dividing whites and blacks became a flood. In 1899, a second ruling, Cumming versus Board of Education, SCOTUS codified the state's rights to send blacks and whites to separate schools. The problem, of course, was that very quickly the concept of separate but equal became separate but unequal. In addition, southern states used the Plessy argument to create barriers to black voters. Many Americans don't realize that following the Civil War, black men outnumbered white men in the South. Immediately following the Civil War, about 750,000 black men voted compared to only about 650,000 whites. 20 black congressmen and 2 black U.S. senators were elected from the 10 southern states. One can hardly imagine how this grated on Southerners at the time, white Southerners at the time. Following the passage of Plessy v. Ferguson, Southern whites began to devise all sorts of laws to prevent black men from voting. I'll give you a break on the Jim Crow stuff for a few weeks, but at some point, based upon the story, a plate of history beans about the black codes and their effect on voting is appropriate. I'll also talk about the lynchings, white mobs, and rapes of black women by whites to prevent blacks from voting. It's a shameful chapter in the U.S. history, but it's one we must not sweep under the rug. As I said last week, Hunting Charm is basically an adventure and a detective story, a western meant to entertain. Even so, it examines what is, in my opinion, the most compelling part of our American history. I had a comment on last week's show claiming our nation is not a melting pot, but rather a salad. While I see some truth in that statement, I think perhaps the melting or melding of that racial stew has just taken much longer than we ever thought it would. Gradually, however, we have made progress. The SCOTUS ruling of Brown versus Board of Education made in May of 1954, overturning Plessy versus Ferguson and closing the door on separate but equal laws, was an important step. I don't know how many more steps will be needed to reach that place that Martin Luther King dreamed of, but I sincerely think most people are walking in the right direction nowadays. That's it for today's Plate of History Beans. As always, if you like my content, hit the like and subscribe buttons. If you're following my book, Hunting Charm, I would invite you to visit my author's page on Amazon. I'll have a link below. I'll also have links to a couple of pages with information about Plessy versus Ferguson and some of the ways that ruling led to entrenched laws in the South that, in a very real sense, extended the suffering of black Americans. Finally, I'll repeat something I said last week because it's something I firmly believe. The key to our nation's greatness is and has always been our diversity. The Founding Fathers left us with laws that force our legislators to sit down and find compromise solutions to polarizing problems. If we lose that, far from making America great, that will damage our nation irreparably. Now it's time for Chapter 22 of my novel, Hunting Charm, A Twinge of Guilt. Chapter 22, A Twinge of Guilt. Doreen left the Johnson Ranch early on a Tuesday morning, perched uncomfortably astride cotton socks. At times she imagined that she would make it without incident to Fort Worth, and once there enjoy a comfortable life working in a saloon. Unfortunately, at other times, an unexpected noise, a bird, or even the sound of wind through the trees filled her with terror. More than once she began to cry and thought seriously about turning back. Each time, though, the frightening image of Henry Walker returned, and she continued, reminding herself again and again of an old story her mother read to her as a child about a man who walked from Italy to China simply by putting one foot in front of the other. The first afternoon passed uneventfully. She followed Cynthia's advice, stopping often to dismount and walk a bit. She also allowed Cotton Socks free rein to drink at any stream they came to, trying her best to focus on the distant hills Cynthia said would guide her to the Shawnee Trail. Once she reached the Shawnee, which Cynthia described as a wide, level path with ruts for a wagon, she need only turn south and within a few days would come to the Red River and Texas. As she had grown older, Doreen had spent less and less time riding horseback. Consequently, after the first hour of her journey south, she found Cotton Sock's plodding gait increasingly uncomfortable. The soreness in her hindquarters led to more crying. Late in the afternoon, as the shadows grew long, she felt she could go no further and stopped alongside a trickling stream. Cynthia told her she needed to cover 15 miles each day, and at that pace would reach Fort Worth in 2 weeks. She could recall days spent traveling by stagecoach and being told they were covering 60 or 70 miles in a day, so she felt 15 miles would be easily achievable. Doreen failed to recall that coach teams of 4 or 6 horses were changed at periodic intervals 4 or 5 times each day. Doreen didn't understand that Cotton Socks didn't walk much faster than a man. To cover 15 miles would require daily travel of 5 or 6 hours. After warming a bit of water for tea and a wipe, Doreen doused her fire again based on Cynthia's advice. Night would be the most fearsome time, and a fire, though comforting, would draw insects, curious animals, or worst of all, men. Cotton Sock's gonna drive off coyotes and such, but she ain't no protection from a man, Cynthia had said. Back at the Johnson Ranch, it was late afternoon before Henry Walker left in search of Doreen. He packed his 2 best mules with a rifle, extra clothing, blankets, a few tools, a tent, and other camping supplies. He knew Doreen was traveling to Fort Worth and soon found Cotton Sock's trail. Henry wasn't following Doreen because of a concern for her safety. He knew there wasn't much to be afraid of. By the early 1870s in that part of Oklahoma, most of the marauding bands of Plains Indians had been subdued. As for animals, surely Doreen had enough common sense to step back if she heard the telltale sound of a rattlesnake. No, Henry didn't expect he would have to rescue Doreen. He was still trying to answer a question. Most people, upon meeting Cactus Branch for the first time, felt he might be mentally deficient in some way. Even those who knew him well and respected him for his carpentry skills felt Henry lacked something in terms of what psychologists would later call emotional intelligence. In truth, Henry possessed a rare degree of intelligence and empathy, which perhaps explained why he suffered so dramatically from his past. Jake often sent Henry days away to plan and supervise construction projects for other Muskogee and even for other tribes. Jake paid Henry with food, building materials, tools, or livestock. In addition, Jake gave Henry blankets and clothing sewn by his wives. There were even women who came now and then to clean Henry's modest home. As for Henry's question, he felt his dreams must have some significance. The singular sexual encounter with Doreen that first night he rightly dismissed as a serendipitous anomaly based upon circumstances he didn't fully understand. He wanted to believe it had some significance, but Henry was not a stranger to human sexuality. Despite the shocking intensity of the encounter, Henry reasoned that God didn't work in such ways. Still, given the persistence of his dreams of a blonde woman, it seemed possible some purpose existed regarding Doreen. Henry's angel had spoken to him many times in his dreams. The musical tones of the angel's voice always assured him that soon the dark night of his existence would be over. He would find a place where his burdens would be lifted. In his resting place beyond this life, where his mother, father, and auntie all lived, and no massa gave orders, he would finally understand everything. In the place the Bible called heaven, everyone would see him as he was, beautiful, whole, confident, totally unlike his human self. In the next life, people would see his heart. They would know of his kindness, his desire to love and be loved. Henry had never been loved, and when one is never loved, how can one express love? He spotted Doreen early on the 3rd day. She had not yet left her camp, though the day had already grown warm. He could think of no way to tell her she should travel early to avoid the heat and humidity of late afternoon, so he simply continued to follow at a discreet distance. When Doreen awoke that day, she knew she needed to get going, but she hadn't realized that simply riding all day could be so taxing. It was nearly noon when she pulled herself from the ground, her shoulders and back aching, damp from the heat, miserable and exhausted. She spent half an hour loading her bedroll and ate a plum from the bag of supplies. Despite the heat, the gentle Henny cotton socks carried her without complaint. Doreen had always had a stableman to keep her horses well fed and groomed, and to hitch her carriage or saddle her ride. Consequently, she didn't fully appreciate Cotton Sock's compliant nature. As she rode on through the afternoon, oppressed by the stifling heat and humidity, she often considered stopping. Still, fears of what lay ahead and behind kept her in a state of uneasiness. So she continued into the evening, sweating profusely and crying much of the time. The fourth day of her journey, she awoke again at around noon. Thirsty, she realized her water bag was nearly empty. In a state of anxiousness, she began to hiccup, which brought on more crying. Fortunately, as she rode along, a small stream appeared. A cool breeze came up, and after her drink, knowing that she should keep moving, she remounted. It occurred to her that she had chosen to travel during the hottest part of the day. She resolved to get an earlier start the next morning. The realization that she had solved a minor problem made her feel better, so as she continued riding, she cried less. When she stopped that evening, she thought once more of Cynthia's advice, which had annoyed her at the time. "You got to get on the mule and keep moving. I gave you 2 weeks of supplies. It's all we can spare. You can't expect any help on the trail. You got to get up in the morning and keep on going. You do that, and in 2 weeks' time you'll be in Fort Worth." Cynthia had offered several bits of advice as they hastily packed Cotton Socks. Doreen wished now that she had paid more attention. One of Cynthia's comments did remain firmly in her mind. "When you get a week or so from the house, you're going to come on a big river. I heard they're doing some work on the railroad in those parts, so you may see some white folk. At any rate, this time of year that river is going to be up and running because of all the spring rains. You just stay on the trail and follow it. You're going to make it fine, 'cause there's a bridge runs across that river. It was built by the military during the war, and last I heard it was still good and solid. Thing is, you should try your best to cross right there. Either way, say the bridge is out, you need to turn west. There's a trail right along the river, and you follow that. There are other places to cross, but the bridge is best. Like I say, the river is running high right now. If you must cross, hang on to Cotton Socks. She's a good girl. She's mighty good." "Okay, I got it." Doreen wished now she had listened more carefully to Cynthia's advice. Had she missed something important? Then, as sometimes happens when humans find themselves in challenging situations, Doreen experienced a moment of introspection. Was it possible she had been rude to Cynthia Johnson? After all, the colored woman had only been trying to help. When Doreen stopped on the 5th day, it was nearly dark. She decided to start a small fire. After gathering a few sticks and some tinder, however, she recalled Cynthia's warning. "Fire is only going to draw the attention of some fools out prowling around at night. You don't want to risk that. The most dangerous thing on the trail is going to be a drunk fool, and that's fearsome enough." She was hungry, but what if some undesirable person was nearby? Once more she began to cry, this time sobbing loudly. Cotton Socks, who she tethered close for protection, nuzzled her gently from behind. A moment later, Doreen had her arms wrapped around the gentle animal. She recalled now how Cynthia had touched Cotton Socks fondly before she left. Cynthia had said the animal was hers to keep. The hinny was tall for her kind and had broad shoulders. Doreen's father, Theo, had taken her to one livestock auction after another from the time she was 2 until she turned 15. Doreen could still recall the disappointment in her father's eyes the day she described auctions as foul-smelling idiots buying and selling foul-smelling animals. Strange that now she felt differently. She could almost hear her father's voice.
A mule's a bit thicker than a horse, though not as quick. A good mule or hinny can be a damn fine mount. You need to look at the chest, legs, hind quarters, and neck. Ask yourself, how does the whole animal fit together?
On and on he went, coaching her on the finer points of judging horses, cattle, mules, and even sheep. Looking at Cotton Socks, Doreen could see that Cynthia had given her a fine animal.
"This here be Cotton Socks," Doreen recalled Cynthia saying. "She ain't old, but she's old enough. She been around these parts and others, so she's smart. She ain't never gonna buck none, even if you get off in some water or on a steep trail. She's a mighty good girl."
Doreen recalled now how Cynthia wrapped her arms around the animal's neck.
"She's a very, very good girl."
Cynthia spoke to Cotton Socks like the hinny was her child or a cherished pet.
"And she's gonna take this white woman safe to Fort Worth, ain't she? Yes, she is."
Cynthia had rubbed one of Cotton Socks' ears, an action the animal seemed to appreciate.
"She gonna make sure this white woman gets safe home to Fort Worth, and Miss Doreen ain't gonna have no reason to hate us none, because we give her the best we have."
Doreen suddenly realized the last bit of Cynthia's speech, ostensibly spoken to the animal, had been for her benefit. For a moment she felt a twinge of guilt. Exhausted, Doreen relaxed against a log as the skies, dotted with clouds, darkened. Grasshoppers chirred and the fragrant aroma of sage filled the air. She had managed to find a comfortable spot near a small pond beneath a stand of oak. In the waning light, the water beckoned to her. All afternoon, sweating in the heat, she had been longing for a bath. As the day faded, shading the western skies dark purple, she decided she would rinse her clothes and take a dip. Standing near the water, she disrobed and gingerly waded in. Henry pitched his tent on a well-covered ridge overlooking Doreen's campsite. With his mule secured, he crawled beneath a stand of cedar and with a small surveyor's telescope had a good view of her campsite. Once darkness fell, he would not be able to see her, so he watched intently through the glass for several long minutes. Through the spyglass, he watched as Doreen disrobed and waded into the pond. Pulling furiously on his John Henry, he struggled to keep her in focus in the telescope's small field of vision. Within moments, he felt the familiar release. He longed for Doreen's touch, but knew she was repelled by his ugliness. After releasing his seed into his hand, racked with guilt over his lustful behavior, he vowed to remain her watchful protector and only reveal himself should danger appear. For 3 days they traveled on, Doreen sobbing at times and at others reflecting on moments spent with family, brief encounters with some cowboy in the back of a grain room, her mother talking about some book or church function. At the same time, Cactus Branch, a mile or so behind, continued to study Doreen with the spyglass, imagining what life might be like if she came to trust him, then scolding himself for his stupidity. As has been previously noted, Henry was no idiot. He realized his surveillance of Doreen was unnatural. He wondered if other men suffered from their lust, but had never had a mentor or a role model to inform him of what might be normal. Did all men, at times, fall victim to their animal instincts to such a degree that they could think only of crude rutting? Most of the time, he felt quite certain that Doreen would never regard him as more than a monster. He knew about fear, had experienced terrors of his own, and had no desire to inspire fear in others. He had determined long ago that even if life and circumstances decreed, he would always live alone, without family or friends, for the rest of his days. He would never become like the cruel night riders that had murdered his father and condemned him to a life of handicap and exile from human comfort.